Hare Krishna. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us in this Bhagavad Gita 7-day course. You could have been anywhere else or you could be watching any other video right now, but you're here with me and I really appreciate that. So before we begin, there's one famous verse in the Gita. It goes like this: Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye. What does that mean? Well, here Lord Krishna is stating that amongst many thousands of people, only one endeavor for perfection. So what? It means that if you are watching this video and you are trying to endeavor for self-realization, spiritual perfection, advancement in bhakti, then you are very rare. And you should be very proud and happy because you are amongst those rare souls that is actually trying to make progress in their spiritual life. So for that, I offer my obeisances and respects to you. Now, in this course, we're going to be studying the Bhagavad Gita in a very simple, organized manner, and we'll go through things one by one. Instead of going chapter by chapter, we're going to go topic by topic. And so we might cover a few chapters all together in one course, pulling from different areas so that we can understand the topics that Lord Krishna is trying to present. So before we start though, I want to thank you very much and welcome you again for joining this course. Now many of you may wonder, what's in it for me? Why should we study the Bhagavad Gita and why should I take the time to learn it? Well, very simply, there's so many benefits from learning the Gita, and we can understand them both in a material perspective or in a spiritual perspective. For example, the Gita teaches us about the long term. What does that mean? Well, most of us think about the long term maybe in months or a quarter or a year. And some major Fortune 500 companies might think in 5 years or 10 years what will happen and try to predict. But what is the Gita teaching us? Here Krishna states that we should think not in terms of years or months, we should think in terms of lifetimes. We should think long term, right? And we should be preparing ourselves for our next birth, not just this one. And we should be looking at the past births and going through 8.4 million species of life, that how can we get out of this cycle of birth and death that we've been going through for billions and trillions and unlimited number of years, right? So it helps us think long term, that we should make decisions for the long term. What else does it do? Well, it also teaches us how to behave or do proper work. And how does it do that? Well, it says that we must respect and honor all living entities. And Lord Krishna states that a wise person sees everyone equal, whether he be a dog or a dog eater. And also he teaches that one should do one's duty very diligently, that one should not try to do another person's duty, but do his own, even though it may be imperfect. Another thing that it teaches us is about relationships. It teaches us that why are we in this family? Who are these family members of mine? And how did I end up in this family and not another one? Or why am I in a privileged family when so many other people are suffering? Or why did this person attack me and why did this person love me? It also teaches us that how should we deal with others? How do we treat our material relationships with one another? And what is the ultimate spiritual relationship we should have? And lastly, it of course teaches us about the perfect spiritual path, the perfect way to have a relationship with the person who we should have the best relationship with. That is Lord Krishna. So it teaches us the path of bhakti, bhakti yoga, where how we can connect our soul to Krishna himself. And Krishna, God himself, is teaching us this path and teaching us what are the benefits of that path. So before we begin, we should try to understand, what does the Srimad Bhagavad Gita mean, right? Many of us have heard this term, or maybe we've picked up the book and we see the title, but we should try to understand what the title means. So instead of normally we'll start from the beginning, let's start from the end. So Gita, Gita in Sanskrit means song, right? And then Bhagavat, Bhagavat we can divide into two parts. Bhag means qualities, right? And Vad means full of. So one who is full of qualities, well, who has the most qualities of them all? And that is Krishna himself, or the Supreme Lord. So Bhagavad Gita means song of God. Now what does Srimad mean? This too we can also divide into two parts. Now, Shri is the feminine energy of Krishna, right? The feminine energy of Krishna, who is that? Srimati Radhika. Shri Radha, right? She's the feminine energy of Krishna. One example our acharyas give us is that just like in our eyes, we have an eyeball, right? But if there is no power of sight or eyesight within that eyeball, then it is completely useless. Just like a blind person also has an eyeball, but it does not serve him any use because he does not have the power of vision. Similarly, Krishna, being Shaktiman, or the holder of energy, is not complete unless he is with Srimati Radhika, because she is the Shakti or energy of Lord Krishna. And we will learn that Mad means blessings. So with the blessings of Srimati Radhika, Lord Krishna, or Bhagavan, or God, has spoken this song. Now, a lot of us wonder, is this book just for Hindus or Sanatanis or Indians? No, this book is for everyone, for every body, actually for every soul. So we can take some inspiration from many famous personalities who have also found so many benefits in the Bhagavad Gita. For example, many of you may know Mahatma Gandhi. Of course, Mahatma Gandhi being the famous personality in the history of India, freedom fighter. And you can see his quote when he reads the Bhagavad Gita. He says that, when doubts haunt me, when disappointments stare me in the face, and I see not one ray of hope on the horizon, I turn to the Bhagavad Gita and find a verse to comfort me. And I immediately begin to smile in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. So you see here, even though someone is unhappy, going through so many trials and tribulations, the Bhagavad Gita provides us with not only relief from that stress, from that material distress, but also happiness. That is the benefit. Then, of course, you know the famous scientist Albert Einstein. He says, when I read the Bhagavad Gita and reflect about how God created this universe, everything else seems so superfluous. Wow. Here, the person that spent his entire life making theories about the universe is saying, when I read the Gita, all of that seems so superfluous, so unimportant. And then Henry David Thoreau, the famous American writer, he says, in the morning when I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, in comparison with which our modern world and its literature seems puny and trivial. Boy, here, one of the most famous authors in American history, one of the most prolific writers, is saying that all of the literature that he has come across us seems puny and trivial in front of the Bhagavad Gita. So these are just three famous personalities. And of course, there's so many modern day celebrities and famous people that are reading about Bhagavad Gita. But we can just take some inspiration from these three, how great they were in their material life, but they found inspiration in the words of Krishna. So, even though these famous personalities give us some inspiration, for the devotee, actually it is those divine personalities which give us the most inspiration. And who are they? They are our gurus. They are the acharyas, those that have come before us and given us this path, illuminated this path of bhakti, of spiritual life. And I would like to first offer my respects to them. Nitilla Pavishtom Vishnupada Stotra Shishimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, and also Nitilla Pavishtom Vishnupada Stotra Shishimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada. And I pray to their lotus feet, Om Agyanti Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Miritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I pray that they give us the blessings that we may learn this Gita exactly as it was intended. For example, it is written Bhagavad Gita as it is, right? Srila Prabhupada added as it is. Why? He wanted to emphasize that we should take the Bhagavad Gita and its instructions as Krishna intended to give them, as they are, not with any material contamination, not with any mental speculation, but exactly as it is. So these two personalities, these divine personalities, spent their entire life not only teaching the Gita, but they also lived the Gita. They demonstrated to us how proper behavior, how we should follow the Gita, how we execute it practically in our material life, how we should follow it, and how we can properly understand what Krishna has given us. So with the mercy and the blessings of these two personalities, I would like to request and pray to their lotus feet that whatever we discuss in these next 7 classes, that it be according to them, it be a repetition of their words, and that we see exactly the Bhagavad Gita, exactly how Lord Krishna intended it for it to be seen. Then I would like to offer one prayer, and we can do this together. One simple prayer to the Bhagavad Gita itself. Now many might say, "What? It's just a book, it's full of paper, it's just a hardcover book with paper and printing inside." But no, Krishna has invested all of his potencies and all of his energy, all of his Shakti in his name and in his Vani. There is no difference between his words and himself. So when we offer our praise to the Gita, we can pray to the Gita, "Oh Bhagavad Gita, you are not just a book. You are Krishna himself." Excuse me, you are Arjun himself. You are the personification of these divine personalities. So please open my heart while I open this book so that I understand your contents. And there is a famous shloka, we can sing it together. Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandana Parthavatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitam Ritam Mahat. Let's try it one more time. Sarvo Panishado Gavo Dogda Gopala Nandana Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitam Ritam Mahat. What does this verse mean? This means that in the Gita Upanishad, see, the Gita is one of the Upanishads. Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the Upanishads. It is like a cow, and Lord Krishna, who is famous as a coward boy, is milking this cow. First, he gives to Parth, who is known as Arjun, who is just like a calf. And thereafter, the learned scholars and pure devotees drink the nectarian milk of Bhagavad Gita. This is actually a very deep verse, because we can see Lord Krishna being a gopa, being a cowherd boy in Vrindavan. He's an expert in milking the cow. And what is that cow? The knowledge, the nectar of the Bhagavad Gita. So he's milking, he's extracting the nectar of all the Upanishads, all the Vedas, all the Puranas, everything in this Bhagavad Gita. And he's giving it to Arjun like a mother or a cow gives milk to the calf, right? And then we as devotees, we as followers of Arjun, because he is a pure devotee. So we need to take the shelter of the pure devotee, take the example from the pure devotee, and then we can also receive that nectar from them. So let's begin. Let's start the class now. So the Bhagavad Gita took place in the epic known as the Mahabharata. This is the great history that took place 5,000 years ago. Now notice I said history, not story, not mythology, not some sort of mental speculation or fairy tale. This is real events that took place over 5,000 years ago. And there's tons of scientific evidence and artifacts that prove that this actually happened. Now, in the Mahabharata, there was a great royal family that had two brothers. One was Pandu, and the other was Dhritarashtra. These two brothers, Dhritarashtra was the older of the two, and Pandu was the younger. Now, in a royal family, typically the oldest son takes over the kingdom once the father passes. But in this case, Dhritarashtra was born blind. And so the residents of the kingdom and the advisors of the kingdom said that it is better that Pandu becomes king because he had all the intelligence and capability to do so. So Pandu had 5 sons known as the Pandavas. Pandavas, sons of Pandu. And Dhritarashtra had 100 sons known as the Kauravas. And in these 5 sons, Yudhishthir was the oldest. And then came Bhim, Arjun, Nakul, and Sahadev. And on the Kaurav side, the oldest son was known as Duryodhan. Now, even though these cousin brothers, grew up in the same kingdom, the same palace, went to the same school, and had the same teachers, they had completely opposite natures. The Pandavas were very pious, good-natured, soft-hearted, and devotees of Krishna. But the Kauravas were the exact opposite. They were evil, they were greedy, and they would do anything to get what they wanted. So even though they grew up in the same atmosphere, they turned out to be completely opposite. Now, when the Pandavas were young and when they were just growing up, Pandu unfortunately died early, and therefore the kingdom needed a king to take care of it. Now, unfortunately, the boys were too young. So what happened is the kingdom went to Dhritarashtra, who became king. So what did he do? Well, first he attempted to kill them by burning their house down while they were still inside. And then he attempted to poison Bhim. And then he cheated them in a game of dice where he sent them to exile for 13 years. So Yudhishthir and his brothers, the Pandavas, they went through so many trials and tribulations because of Duryodhan and this kingdom. They even went to exile. Can you imagine being born in a royal family, enjoying the most luxurious of atmospheres and food, and then having to go to the forest for 13 years and live like mendicants? So the Pandavas suffered tremendously. But even though they went through all of this suffering, they were still very soft-hearted and always took shelter of Sri Krishna. They were always under the guidance of Krishna, always his devotee, despite going through so many troubles. So when the exile was finished and Yudhishthir was supposed to be crowned king again, Duryodhan again refused and said, "No, I will not allow him to become king." And the Pandavas, again being soft-hearted in nature and saying, "Okay, we do not want to fight. We do not want to cause any problem. Duryodhan, you have the kingdom, but please just give us 5 villages so that we can maintain ourselves." And what did Duryodhan say? He said, "No, forget about 5 villages. I won't even give you 5 steps of land so that you can maintain yourself." So what were they forced to do? They were forced to fight. The Kauravas forced the Pandavas to fight. The Pandavas did not want to. So do not misinterpret this history as the Pandavas wanting to fight for a kingdom. They were forced to do so. In fact, they did diplomacy. They begged, they went to all of their elders and said, please, give him some understanding. Please, we just want some small amount just so that we can maintain ourselves. But Duryodhana refused and said, not until I kill the Pandavas will I be satisfied. So then they were forced to go to war, and then the Battle of Kurukshetra happened. So you can see in this beautiful picture how many people were involved in this war. There were millions and millions of soldiers involved. In fact, every kingdom chose one side, either the Pandavas or the Kauravas, to fight on. And you can see that this army, compared to this huge army, is much smaller. And which army is this? This is the army of the Pandavas. And this one is of the Kauravas. So the Pandavas had what's called 7 Akshohinis in their army. What is Akshohini? It is, without getting too complicated, consists of 150,000 soldiers, thousands of horse riding soldiers, elephants, and so many archers and warriors. It's made up of so many hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And so having 7 is over 1 million people. And the Kauravas had 11 Akshohinis. So it was significantly larger. So what lesson can we learn? Why are the Kauravas having a bigger army than the Pandavas? Well, one of the first lessons we can learn is that there is always more evil than good in the world. If you want to be good, you will always be outnumbered. And if you want to do good, it will always be difficulty. For example, our Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada used to say that if one wants to progress in spiritual life, if one wants to do anything good, you can expect that there will definitely be obstacles in the way. That is because this is the nature of this material world, where you will always be outnumbered when you try to do something good. But you should remember, like the Pandavas, despite being outnumbered, there were 5 brothers versus 100 Kauravas, 7 Akshohinis versus 11 Akshohinis. Still, they always remained on the side of good and ultimately obtained victory. So when this battle is just about to take place, imagine the morning of the battle, everything is finally culminating in this great war full of millions of people. Then Arjun, one of the Pandavas, the middle brother, he says to Krishna, who is his chariot driver, the Supreme Lord became the chariot driver of Arjun. Can you imagine? We think the Lord or God is a person who might sit on a golden throne with long hair and jewelry and everything, and just sit on a golden throne and twick his fingers and the whole world moves. But no, Krishna is not like that. He has relationships with his devotees. He is the Bhakta Vatsal, or the nourisher of the devotees, one who cares for his devotees. And even though a charioteer, one who drives a chariot, is actually the lowest post amongst all of the army, he does not fight. He simply guides the horses. The Lord himself, being the top person in the entire universe, takes the position of a charioteer. Why? Because his devotee, his friend, asked him to do that, right? So this is the nature of the Lord. He's extremely humble, and he's extremely caring and loving to his devotees, that he's willing to do anything for them. So when Arjun sees this battle, he asks Krishna to take him in the middle of the battlefield. And when he goes to the middle of the battlefield, what happens? He becomes bewildered. He becomes confused. Why? Because in the army of the Kauravas, who is standing there? His gurus, his teachers, his grandfather, his uncles, his cousins, all the people that he grew up with, all the people that he got instruction from, learned from, that he sat in their lap. He took shelter of them when he was a child. He received so much love from them. But still, today, they are now standing on the opposite side of the battlefield. ready to kill him. Can you imagine being in a situation like Arjun? I think most of us cannot even imagine that situation. Many of us get into disputes or troubles with our family, maybe over an inheritance, or over land, over property, over so many other things, or maybe some philosophical difference. But can you imagine that any one of them is on the other side trying to kill you? And forget about one of them, if all of them are on the other side trying to kill you. Can you imagine what kind of situation Arjun is in? It's such a difficult situation. And so we can relate to Arjun in the way that, my gosh, he's in such a difficult position. He's in such a bewildering position that we cannot even imagine. And let's see how he behaves. So the first thing he does is tell Krishna that, no, I won't fight. Here, everyone has gotten ready for battle. Everyone is just about to start. And right now, he goes in the middle and he says, Krishna, I have no desire to fight. And why? Because Arjun is a soft-hearted, pious person. He cares. He wants to do the right thing. And he says, why should I kill my own family, my friends and my teachers? Just because they are ready to fight me, just because some of my family is evil and wants to take everything from me and wants to kill me, why should I become like them? Does that make me any better? If someone punches me and I punch them back, does that make me an okay person? Right? And he says, I'd rather be a beggar than enjoy a kingdom that's tainted with blood. Now, here is a royal person, one who has enjoyed luxuries and just finally finished the exile of 13 years. And what does he say? He'd rather be a beggar. That is because Arjun has no material attachments. He's not desirous of having large land or being a great king. That's not his goal. He wants to do the right thing. As a Kshatriya or as a warrior, he wants to fight and defend on the side of good versus evil. That is his only goal, right? So when he thinks that, no, I'm not doing the right thing, then he immediately gives up his ego and says, I won't fight. Now let's take a step back and try to understand who Arjun is. He's not an ordinary soul, right? He's a divine personality. And how can I say that? Because he is the son of Indra, the great demigod or the king of the demigods. What else is he? He's also, more importantly, one of Krishna's best friends. He was so dear to Krishna that they would often spend the entire night talking with one another. They would sleep in the same room because they were inseparable. They would eat their meals together. They spent so much time together, and Arjun was always near and dear to Krishna. What else was he? Well, he was the greatest archer of all time. We often say goat, right? Well, he was the greatest of all time in archery. And he was the greatest warrior. In fact, there's a story in the Mahabharata when during the exile of the 13 years, Arjun single-handedly fought the Kauravas in a battle. The entire Kaurav army came to fight only Arjun. And what happened? Arjun defeated them all. So you can imagine his Shakti, his power. And he is not a fearful person. He's not a weak person. He's not scared of dying. He single-handedly went to that battlefield and defeated the entire Kaurav army. And now, in this situation, he's with his brothers and 7 Akshohinis are with him. You think he's scared of the Kauravas and that's why he's running away? No, it's because he wants to do the right thing. What else about Arjun? In his previous life, he was Nara Rishi. And who is Nara Rishi? Many of you have heard of Nara Narayan. Well, Nara is the Rishi who spent his entire life meditating on what? Meditating on how can I help? How can I serve humanity? So because of that meditation, because of that tapasya, Nara Rishi became Arjun in his next life. And what is he doing? He is behaving like us, becoming bewildered in a state of confusion during a difficult time. And he approaches Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita and asks him questions as if he's confused. And through those questions, the Supreme Lord himself, Bhagavan himself, God himself, is giving us the answers. And ultimately, who is the beneficiary? We are. So is this not the greatest service to humanity? Where Arjun is showing this pastime of confusion. See, he's a pure devotee. He's a divine personality. He experiences no such confusion in reality. But he's displaying this confusion as a pastime so that he can serve us, he can help us, and we can refer to the Gita throughout our life and be benefited from it, right? So Arjun is such a glorious personality. He's very powerful. He collected so many celestial weapons, right? But he always wanted to do good. Most of the time, and this is another lesson, when we become powerful or famous or strong or full of any material quality, what happens to us? We become egoistic. And we want others to recognize our power and others to glorify us. But Arjun is willing to sacrifice everything to do the right thing. And this is the glory of Arjun. So Arjun, we should try to recognize that in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjun represents you. Arjun represents us. Why? Because we all go through difficult times in our life, right? There's one beautiful example that devotees like Arjun, devotees also go through difficult times. So some may ask, well, what's the point of being a devotee of Krishna if he doesn't make our life easy and simple, right? What's the point? Why should I pray to God if my life is difficult? And if the people that pray to God, their lives are difficult, well, what's the point? So this very beautiful example is given, just like when we travel on a road, right? We travel on a road that is full of potholes and bumps and so many other obstacles. There's one car that is like a very old car with a bad suspension. And every time he's going over those potholes and bumps, he's feeling everything. That car is feeling everything. But then there's another car, a brand new, let's say Mercedes-Benz, right? What happens if they go over a pothole or a bump? They barely feel it, right? Similarly, the devotee and the non-devotee of Krishna, they go through the same difficulties in life, but it's the understanding and the knowledge, like from the Bhagavad Gita, that gives us the tolerance and ease to deal with these problems, like driving in a Mercedes-Benz. That's what it's like to be a devotee. I'm not saying it's a material gain. I'm saying that it gives us the strength, the tolerance, and the perseverance to deal with these difficulties because we understand that it's only simply a result of our karma. We must learn to tolerate. Tatte anukampam susamikshimanu. We must learn to tolerate and move on, continuing to take shelter of Krishna. And in that way, we can easily cross these difficulties and obstacles of our life. Now, another beautiful thing that Arjun does is that when he gets confused, he goes to Krishna in chapter 2 and he says, Krishna, now I have become your disciple. Now I'm confused. You please instruct me and I will accept whatever you say. Now, why is this important? Because many of us, when we go through difficulties asking who? Our friends and our family. We approach our friends and our family and we say, I'm going through this problem or I don't know what to do. Can you please help me? Right? And what happens when we hear our friend's advice? We only listen to that advice that we want to. For example, if we go to a friend and he tells us, no, I think you're wrong in this situation, not the other person. What do? We go to the next friend and say the same thing until we find a friend who is our real friend that says, yes, you're right, they're wrong, you shouldn't have to say sorry or you shouldn't have to do anything. So we go to the friends or we go to the family members and want to hear the things that we want to hear. But what does Arjun do? He goes to Krishna and says, I am your disciple. You are my guru. So Arjun is instructing us that when we're confused and in a difficult situation, we should approach Sri Guru. We should accept the shelter of Sri Guru, and we should accept what they say. Now, what is the difference between the relationship of guru and disciple versus friend or family? In that relationship, we can take what we want and reject whatever we don't want. But in the relationship of guru and disciple, the disciple should accept wholeheartedly 110% of what the guru says. Now, of course, I'm not saying that he should be blind or andavishwas or just accept exactly what the guru says because he's a guru. No, he's welcome to have questions and doubts. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena seveya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. Even Lord Krishna is instructing in Bhagavad Gita that one should approach a guru, submit himself, be submissive to them, and ask questions and clear the doubts. After all, the Bhagavad Gita, what is it? Just a series of questions and answers. Because Arjun has a doubt, and then Krishna clears the doubt. So this is the relationship that Arjun is teaching us. When we are in times of difficulty, we should approach Sri Guru, and they will give us the guidance according to the perfect spiritual instruction. Now, after he asks this question, after he submits himself to Krishna, then finally Krishna responds. Before then, and up until then, when Arjun is being taken into the middle of the battlefield, when he sees all of his family and friends on the opposite side, Krishna says nothing. Only until Arjun accepts him as guru, accepts his instruction, then Krishna responds. And what does Krishna say? He starts off by telling Arjun level by level spiritual instruction. Why level by level? Well, just like a good teacher doesn't know where each student lies on the understanding of knowledge, he has to bring all of them to the same level, right? Just like, for example, if I walk into a classroom and I meet students for the first time, I don't know what the understanding level is of each student. I have to make them bring to a certain basic level, a foundation of understanding before we can go on the next steps. Similarly, Krishna teaches from the very basic, from the very start, the foundation of spiritual instruction so that Arjun has a good foundation, so that we have a good foundation and then can finally progress. And what does he start with? He starts with, you are not the body, you are the soul. Now, this is a very difficult concept. You are not the body, you are the soul. You are the Atma, you are not the Sharir. Right? And why does he say that? He says that, Arjun, don't be attached to those things which are related to the body. Because what is the body? The body is temporary. And everything related to the body is temporary. For example, our relationships in this world, right? The material objects that we own, even the body itself is temporary. After all, what are we going to live? 75, 85, maybe 100 years? After that, what happens? These relationships are gone, and the objects associated with the body are gone, and even the body itself is gone. So Krishna is reminding Arjun that you are not the body. You are the Atma inside. You are that eternal being which is inside you, which has gone through millions of lifetimes, and this is just one of them. So today they are your grandfather, but after this lifetime, they don't know who you are. They may not know who you are, and you may not know who they are. So instead of thinking that you are the body, instead of judging this war on the basis of they're my family, they're my friends, instead you should judge this on the basis of what is my Atma's duty? What is my soul's duty? What is the right thing to do based on the soul? Now, before we go on, let's take a quick peek inside as Krishna describes who we really are. So most of us understand ourselves to be the body. And you can see here, I'm a very good artist. Perfectly symmetrical body, right? So here is the body that we are, and this is known as the gross body, also known as Sthula Sharir in Sanskrit. And what is the gross body made of? It's made of blood, right? Bones, and also things like stool and urine, and so many other things that we physically see. It's a bag of skin and bones, is what they say, right? And it's everything we see in our physical sense. That's the gross body. Now, Krishna instructs that inside this gross body, there's one more body, and that is the subtle body, right? And what is the subtle body? In Sanskrit, it's called Sukshma Sharir, subtle body. And subtle are all those things that we know we have, but we can't touch or feel. Think about that for a second. What do you have that you can't touch or feel? For example, our mind, right? We all have a mind, but we can't put our finger on it. And then we have intelligence. And then we all have false ego. What's false ego? For example, I am a male or female. I am Indian, or I'm American or European or Chinese or whatever, right? All the things that are related to this body that we identify ourselves with. I'm an intelligent person. I'm educated. I'm a businessman. I'm a doctor, engineer, right? All of those things are false ego because they have to do with the body and not the real self. What else is there? There's also desires, feelings or emotions, and so many other things. Now, Krishna instructs us that when this gross body is complete, when we die, this gross body goes away, but the subtle body remains if we are not perfectly realized. So this subtle body goes from body to body. That's why you see in so many examples, like on YouTube or in the news, you might see like a 3-year-old kid who plays the piano perfectly, even though he's never taken a single piano lesson in his life. Or what about that famous story of the 5-year-old kid, James, who was born in America, but knew everything about his past life? He remembered that he was a World War II pilot, and he remembered his name, what uniform he wore, what plane he flew, the name of his plane, what battle he fought in, what his friends' names were, and what battle he ultimately died in. And when the historians and the news media went back to try to find out, is this boy telling the truth? Was there a person named this and that? They found that it exactly matched what that 5-year-old boy had said. And he said, because I was there, that was me. Can a 5-year-old make this up? 5-year-old had no idea a World War II even happened. They didn't go to school and learn history by then. So this subtle body, sometimes we remember our past life, and the subtle body is what reminds us or carries with us to our next lifetime. Now, what else is there? Krishna describes that there's also the soul and within us, and that is known as Atma, right? Atma. So this soul is who we really are. And Krishna describes very beautifully that the soul is so small. It is described that it is 1/10,000th the tip of your hair. If I pluck my hair and I take the tip and I cut it in 10,000 pieces, the soul is still smaller than that. So you can imagine how small it is. It cannot be discovered by scientific microscopes or anything of that nature because it is transcendental, beyond the material world. So we are this soul, and without the soul, as soon as the body dies, the soul leaves it and the body becomes useless. And then there is also a fourth aspect, What is that fourth aspect? That we each have Paramatma within us. And we'll talk about this more in future classes. Paramatma means super soul, or the manifestation of Krishna that is within each and every one of us. And Srila Prabhupada and our acharyas give us the example that this is the soul and the super soul are like two birds on a branch. One of them is simply watching the other bird and not doing anything, not saying anything, just watching and waiting. While the other bird, us, is so busy collecting leaves and twigs to make a nest, then finding a wife for enjoyment, and then having children, then looking for food for the children and themselves, always busy in hankering and getting material objects. And what is the super soul doing? Simply remaining quiet and watching. And what is the super soul waiting for? That once the soul understands that collecting and doing all these activities is not going to bring him ultimate happiness, the super soul is waiting until the Atma just turns and looks towards him. This is what Krishna wants, that ultimately all we have to do is just look towards him. So this beautiful painting is describing the cycle of birth and death that Krishna describes to Arjun. And what is it saying? That our soul, right? Our soul is going through birth, through boyhood, through youth, through old age, and finally death. And then it is repeated again and again, right? Now this picture shows a human form, but actually our scriptures describe that this is just, the human body is just one of 8.4 million species of life. And we have been going through these millions of species of life since time immemorial. Time immemorial means forever. There's no calculation of how many lifetimes we've been through. Sometimes we were a dog. Sometimes we were a hog. Sometimes we were a plant. Sometimes we were a demigod. And now, finally, after traversing through these millions of species of life, finally we have the rare opportunity to become human. Why is it rare? Because only in the human form of life can we achieve spiritual realization, spiritual truth, right? And we can practice and progress in our spiritual life as a human being. So our acharyas have told us, the Bhagavad Gita tells us, Krishna tells us that we should not waste this opportunity. We should not waste this human birth of life because we have the opportunity to get the highest thing, right? Which is what? Krishna Prem, Bhakti, Shuddha Bhakti, Radha Dasyam, right? This is the highest goal of life. And most of us are simply wasting it in just collecting material things and going through this cycle of birth and death. Finally, once we realize that this process is very, very painful, it does not lead to eternal happiness, then we can finally look at that other bird, Krishna, and get out of this cycle of birth and death. So what is the nature of the soul? How can we really identify ourselves with the soul? How do we understand how the soul is? Well, it's described in the scriptures that the soul is Sat Chit Anand. Now, many of you might have heard of these words, but let's break them down. What does Sat mean? Most of us might think it might mean truth, but it means eternality or permanence. Right? We are eternal beings. We never die. We are always alive. You know that saying, feel alive? That's because our soul is alive. We always feel alive. And you know how no one ever thinks they're going to die? No matter how old or young they might be, no matter if they're staring at death in their face, they still don't think that they will die. That's because we don't actually die. Our soul never dies. We are eternal beings. What does chit mean? Chit means knowledge. Right? Knowledge. That we are always searching for the perfect knowledge. The most perfect knowledge is spiritual knowledge. That is what our soul wants, so that we can achieve spiritual realization. And then finally, Ananda. Ananda, just like in Hindi, means happiness or bliss. The soul is always searching for bliss, always wants to be happy. We always want to be eternally happy. And that is the eternal nature of the soul, to be happy. And the only way to become happy is when we develop pure love. And by developing pure love to the pure person, which is Sri Krishna, then we can finally achieve Ananda, eternal happiness. So the soul is eternal, and everything related to the body is temporary. So Krishna tells that Arjun, practice, always remember that whatever you make a decision, whatever you do in life, however you progress, think of it in terms of the soul and not the body. Okay? Try to make decisions that are for the benefit of your soul, that are lifetime decisions, not just make your body temporarily happy. By doing so, by understanding what is the nature of the soul, what is the swabhav of the soul, what is the swarup of the soul, and what is the goal of the soul, what is the duty, then we can really very quickly progress on spiritual life. Jivera sarup hoy Krishnera nityadas, Krishnera tatastha shakti bhed abhed prakash. That eternally we are the servant of Krishna. This is our internal nature. This is our swarup. So when we identify that, then we can really progress on the path of bhakti, on the path of spiritual realization. Because when we are firm faith, when we have firm faith in Krishna's words and Shastra's words, then we can really progress. Now, if we think about it, what would happen if we stopped identifying ourselves with the body? What would happen in this world? Even just from a material perspective, there's so many benefits. For example, there would be no racism. Why? Because we wouldn't look at the people around us from their skin color or their body. We would look at them as individual souls. What else would happen? We wouldn't have any judgments. Right? We also wouldn't be jealous of another's body. And we wouldn't be attracted to just the body. Right? These 4 problems are huge problems in this world today, and they would go away just by simply looking and having the vision of being the soul. What else would happen? We wouldn't be eating meat, because we would recognize that all living entities in this world are the soul inside, that their bodies are not for our enjoyment. Their flesh is not for my sense pleasure. We would understand that inside there's a soul, and that soul is eternal and the servant of Krishna. So why would we kill their body for simply our pleasure? So it was agreed that Dhritarashtra would just be a temporary placeholder until Yudhishthira grew up and was able to become king on his own. But fate would have it that Duryodhana would have nothing to do with this. He said that I want the kingdom, I deserve to be the king, because my father is king and I'm his oldest son, right? So he convinced his father, Dhritarashtra, that he should be king. And our acharyas describe Dhritarashtra as not only blind within his eyes, but also blind within his intelligence and his intellect. So Duryodhana, being evil and being greedy, said, I will do anything to get the kingdom away from the Pandavas, right? Ultimately, our soul, our selves will pay the price in dealing with it, and we will learn about that in the Bhagavad Gita. So imagine no racism, no judgments, no lust in one's heart, and no meat eating, which is the number one cause of environmental destruction in this world. Imagine if there was none of this, because if we followed the instructions of the Gita, we would stop identifying ourselves with the body and we would identify ourselves with the soul. But this is hard to do. And as we know, it is very difficult for us to identify ourselves as a soul. After all, I'm a man. I'm a businessman. I'm this and this years old. I went to this university. I'm so smart. I'm handsome or beautiful or whatever. We think about all these things. And even when we try to think we're the soul, sometime later, we often just go back to the same level of thinking. And Krishna understands that. After all, Bhagavad Gita is very practical. And Arjun also understands that. So Krishna then tells us to do one thing. First, you should do step one. You should practice Karma Yoga. By practicing Karma Yoga, then we can slowly, gradually purify ourselves and remove ourselves from the bodily concept of life. But remember, just like I mentioned earlier, Krishna takes us level by level, and this is just the first step. Don't think, many people think after reading the Bhagavad Gita that doing the right duty, doing the right karma, doing the right actions is enough. This is the goal of life. This is sufficient. But no, this is just the first step. So in our next class, we will discuss Karma Yoga, learn all about Karma Yoga, which I think is so interesting and clears out so many of our doubts. Like, why was I born in a certain family? Why am I rich or poor? Why is my health bad? Why do good things happen to bad people or bad things happen to good people? All of those basic questions are answered when we discuss Karma Yoga. So thank you for attending this class. Please join us for the next class about Karma Yoga, and Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Shri Krishna Chandra ki jai. Shri Arjun ki jai. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna.